What's that, you might ask? Well, let me go ahead and show you. That is my lovely computer. I'll go ahead and turn it off here. So that's the story. I just thought I'd give you this since this has been quite of a long adventure for me, and possibly I thought you might find it amusing, even though it didn't end the way it should have. Um, yeah, I'm hoping to get a new computer.
The video you were just watching went on for quite some time. I was going to send it to my professor explaining why I couldn't complete a project she had already extended for me. Um, but then, as I was kind of reviewing it on my iPad, which I'm shooting on now and I used to make that video, I thought, why don't I just use the iPad to finish it up? Sure, the iPad doesn't have all the bells and whistles that my iMac has with all the fancy programs, and I can't use my best camera, my mic that I procured, and all these other things, but I can get the job done. And isn't that what a project about leadership should be all about anyway? So today I'm going to discuss leadership and more specifically the works of Jim Collins, a leadership guru and theorist. What I'll be doing is trying to connect his work to educators and education. How do these things apply to us? And I'll be getting into a little bit in the beginning about Mr. Collins himself. So not only is this a mini bio piece, but it's also a chance to show how Jim Collins' leadership practices could help teachers, administrators, and other people in education.
Mr. James C. Collins, or Jim for short, has authored or co-authored 6 books to date, totaling over 10 million copies sold worldwide. In titles like Good to Great, Built to Last, How the Mighty Fall, and Great by Choice, Jim has looked into topics like why some companies get awesome results while others fall from grace. Why do some companies endure and stand the test of time while others flounder? In addition, how do some deal with the chaos the world throws their way, because our world is anything but predictable most times? Beyond these books, Jim has also frequently contributed to magazines like Harvard Business Review, Business Week, Fortune, and many others. It's obvious Jim Collins has enjoyed success as a writer and leadership guru, but how did this all come about? He initially studied mathematics at Stanford University and later got his MBA there. I speculate that it was during this time that he began to examine leadership more intensely. Upon graduation, he worked for a consulting company called McKinsey & Company, which later transitioned into becoming a product manager for Hewlett-Packard. After that, he switched gears and began researching and teaching at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. He received the Distinguished Teacher Award in 1992, and later in 1995, decided to open his own management research lab to teach executives and members of the social sector. Since our discussion is primarily about how Mr. Collins can help educators, which reside in the social sector, I thought it might be interesting to see a few of the organizations Mr. Collins has helped.
And so Mr. Collins has quite the track record working with several big-name organizations from the social sector, and also a long list of corporate clientele that I didn't really mention, but they're out there. And it kind of begs the question, why? What are all these people, what are they seeing in him? What's he selling? What is he teaching people about leadership that's so impressive?
One idea of Jim's that I continued to run across as I was researching him was the idea of a level 5 leader. A level 5 leader is someone who is so committed to their cause that they'll do anything to get it done. So basically what separates them from the pack is that they not only have all the other tools in place to be a great manager, but they have something that you can't really teach, and that's desire. And so it seems that Jim believes in a lead by example champion, more so than the charismatic kind of leader that seemed to be popular about 100 years ago. Many people were thinking, hey, if you're going to be a great leader, you need to have charisma. And here he's saying, not necessarily. You can lead by example, and the final factor that's going to say whether you're great or just kind of mediocre would be how committed are you to your cause.
The level 5 leader idea is definitely popular throughout Mr. Collins' work, and it also gets a lot of ridicule, unfortunately. I'll get into that towards the end of this video. But it is one of his individual philosophies, if you will, because it seems that he's got a lot more organizational-wide philosophies. At least through my research, that's what I ran into. So just to touch on one of them before we move on, he mentions in Fortune magazine about an organizational idea he has, and he calls it fire bullets, then cannonballs. And this kind of relates to how an organization makes a dramatic innovation. Here he lists the iPad as an example, so I'm just going to read this to you. A successful venture or breakthrough product can look in retrospect like a single-step act of pioneering creativity, but that retrospective bias is deceiving. The path to something like, say, the iPod turns out to be a multi-step, iterative process. First, firing bullets to gain empirical validation before making a big bet, firing a cannonball. Who would have expected that empirical creativity, not visionary genius, better explains 10 times excess in a chaotic world? So Mr. Collins has these ideas that are geared towards individuals and also towards a whole organization. But how does this all connect to education? I began to get very interested in this when I was researching him. How specifically did he connect it to education? Is there some text that he's talking about it in? Because I couldn't find it initially. And it seemed like a lot of people from outside business, the business world, were very interested in his work. There's more than just businessmen buying his different books. There are church leaders and, also teachers and people from the social sector who really admire and like his writing. So I thought there must be some text that specifically talks about this. There has to be. And for some reason, it was just missing. I was missing it. Even if there wasn't a text, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to kind of connect some of this stuff. For example, his organizational theory that I just mentioned, fire bullets, then cannons. Basically, try many different variations of something on a small scale before you make the big jump. That could help education. That's a very simple principle, but that could help education or school districts immensely before making some kind of big change. So there's that, but I was definitely looking for his particular words on this, his particular opinion on how do these things connect up. And that's when I actually realized it was right in front of me. He has a book called Good to Great, which has been mentioned in the video. But after he wrote that and after he got all this feedback from people, he decided he was going to go ahead and publish what he calls a monograph. I'm just going to call it an extra chapter. And the extra chapter, it focuses exclusively on the social sector and the challenges there because it's a lot different than business. So that's what we'll look at for the end of the video. I went ahead and read it. It's about 40 pages. It's actually free if you'd like to download it. I'll put the link below.
Let's take a look.
One of the first things he talks about is inputs versus outputs, because a lot of people were asking him, hey, I'm not a business. How do I measure success? We don't make money here. So if you divide your inputs and outputs, he says, you're going to get a lot farther in understanding whether or not you're successful by measuring only your outputs. At a school, outputs could be things like test scores, or how many people graduated, how many people went on to go to college, things like this. You have to measure those outputs. And even if it's very, very difficult to, measure them, or maybe it's something kind of intangible, you still have to do the best you can and, hold yourself accountable to those outputs. Of course, school leaders could benefit from this, admin, but it trickles down. I mean, people, when dealing with the teachers themselves, people who are head teachers or the principals could use this same theory to gauge their success. And then in the classroom, teachers could also use this theory to gauge how well they're doing.
I would definitely encourage anybody to go back and read this portion of the free chapter, because there's an outstanding example of an orchestra, and the conductor was able to turn this orchestra around, and they made money and actually improved a lot, but that was not the focus in the beginning. Through focusing on other things like the quality of their music and different aspects like that, the money came. And it's that old saying, kind of, do what you love, and in the end, the money will come. I think with all the regulations and things that the government has been pushing on schools, we're kind of losing track of that. And this portion of the chapter points back to what I feel is a very important part of education.
Next, Jim talks about the leadership style that could be used in the social sector. And, he points that it shouldn't be an executive style, and it shouldn't probably be a pure legislative style, but kind of a mixture of the two. I think most schools are a mixture, but when, the admin starts talking and saying, we need to do this, blah, 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 it can get a little bit executive style. So I think the leaders at the top need to remember that for teachers to be in it to win it, they need choice. And, there's one quote that really rang true to me, and it goes like this: true leadership only exists if people follow when they have the freedom not to. So you need to give people choice. This starts in the classroom. Teachers can't be pushing things down students' throats and expecting great test results and participation. And then this idea works its way all the way up through the organization, all the way up through the school. You can't, force teachers to want to be a part of the cause. They have to want to do it for themselves. And, that's kind of where the give and take of being a little bit executive and a little bit legislative comes in. Giving people choice to donate their resources to the cause. That's a big, big thing that schools need to think about.
The last thing I want to touch on from Jim's book, Good to Great, and this extra chapter about the social sector, is the idea of tenure. Now, tenure is a huge problem in a way, because what will happen in many cases is people get tenure and they get a little bit lackadaisical. They're not really motivated anymore. And so what can you do to kind of change that? And basically the idea is just have a more intense hiring process from the beginning. And this was kind of adapted from a couple stories that are in the chapter. One was about a science teacher in Boulder, Colorado, named Roger Briggs. And Roger, in the beginning, when he first started teaching there, or becoming the hiring manager rather, when he first started hiring people, he would say to them, they'd ask, can we get tenure? And how will that work? And he would say, oh yeah, if you work hard, you'll get tenure. That was his initial response. And then he found that, the quality of the faculty was not as high as he wanted, and he decided to make a change. When people asked, will we get tenure? He would say, no, you're not going to get tenure unless you're an outstanding teacher. And it was kind of this push that led Roger Briggs to totally change his faculty and his department. So the idea is not really so much of getting rid of bad people, let's say, but more so bringing in new people that will motivate the older people, and then slowly building up a new mass of really great people in your department. That's what the idea essentially is. How do you do that? Well, of course, when you initially interview them, you want to select the right candidate. But then after you bring them in, you also want to continue assessing them early on so that you can avoid the mistake you made before of, getting someone in there that you can't get out. And that's kind of the issue with the social sector, is getting people in there and then they're just locked and they're not motivated. Jim seems to have a great idea here, and I think it could really help schools if applied.
The tips mentioned here, coming from the Good to Great extra chapter and some of the other things mentioned before, a lot of these things are organizational tips which would affect the whole school, but there's no reason why you couldn't tailor it down to fit your individual needs. For example, if you are the head of a particular department in the school, why not use some of the ideas there? Or in your own classroom, you could do that as well. When we talk about leadership theory, we have to keep in mind that this is a fairly new science and in the terms of the world. It hasn't been around for any major way for more than 100 years, if that. And, from my initial studies, it seemed like it really took off in the 70s. So we got a long way to go here. One thing I found compelling about Mr. Collins' work, though, was that even people who had a distaste for management rants and books, even they seemed to enjoy his material. And one reviewer was quoted as saying, from Moz.com, he was quoted as saying, "To me, the compelling part isn't the advice, but the research itself." And that kind of rings true with my own feelings as well. I want to read something that's not going to be... It's going to be entertaining, but also that it's backed in some kind of scientific evidence. However, there are other people who didn't really see the same light, and there are several complaints about his work because he's so popular, no doubt. Some people think that his ideas are a little bit too vague, almost like a horoscope. That this information could be applied to any reader. Also, people are attacking his research. The very thing that I would think makes it compelling, the research itself, people are saying that research is not right. This is not how you should do that, and on and on and on. And I saw many people who were actually against his work. The fact that he is using this term research to help sell his book definitely opened him up to attack, and so people are looking at the research and saying, well, your research is wrong, so your ideas are wrong. And I don't know if that's completely true or not. I don't know if his research, I didn't go that far with it to validate his research or not, but let's assume that his research is not sound. Still, the ideas that are presented seem very logical and could help people who have problems at a school or in other places. For me, I see any leadership theory or material more as a source of inspiration and reference than a pure manual. Therefore, if I were to use these ideas in education to improve teachers' leadership or the leadership of the admin, I would be cautious and certainly adapt the content to fit my surroundings. I teach ESOL, and there have been numerous one-size-fits-all systems proposed throughout ESOL history, but the reality is no one style or methodology covers all the bases. There are just too many aspects to a person's personality, background, culture, home life, etc., etc. The list goes on, and just like that, the same applies for leadership theories. There's no theory that's going to apply to everyone in every situation. Because of my outlook, perhaps, I found reading his work really entertaining because of the stories, and I thought the ideas were pretty sound. I think no matter what, you need to examine your particular situation and try to pick it apart yourself to focus leadership advice, but not take it literally. If a book helps in that process, then consider it a blessing, but do not expect to rely on the words of someone you have never met to fix your business or your school, because even under close examination, the problem is probably very complex. Use the words of people like Jim Collins to find the answer in yourself. That would be my advice.